Dan Berman, we were carrying Senator Harry Reid on C-SPAN 2 earlier today, and 2 points that he made with regard to the Republican plan. He said that Senate Democrats and Senate Republicans were, quote, blindsided by this House version. He also added that he was, quote, disappointed in Speaker Boehner. How did this all come about over the last 12 to 16 hours?
Well, what's happened is Reid and McConnell basically kind of took the reins and started talking. Reid has been kind of the Democratic negotiator, both in terms of representing the Senate and also representing the White House. Joe Biden, who has kind of traditionally made these last-minute deals, has been pushed to the sideline on this time. And what you saw and kind of unveiled yesterday was the idea that there would be some type of deal that would push everything, the debt ceiling, and keeping the government open until early next year. There would also be a couple of tweaks to Obamacare, not full defunding that a lot of Republicans have been pushing for and kind of precipitated the shutdown. I think people kind of expected that the House today would come back with some alternative, some pushback. It's interesting that the Senate deal hasn't been finalized. There is no bill, to look through or that's been introduced, and I mean the framework is out there as you explained. But of course, the House was going to come back with something. I mean, John Boehner has said that the Senate plan wouldn't be able to pass his House. The House Republicans, especially the Tea Party caucus, has been adamant against anything that looks like capitulation to the White House. But there are some concessions here. It would just like the Senate plan, it would push the federal spending bill until early next year. It would put the debt ceiling until February. So there is some movement there. The House had originally talked about doing a 6-week plan that would put it towards the end of November, near Thanksgiving. There obviously are some differences. The House plan would delay the medical device tax for 2 years, cancel those health insurance subsidies for members of Congress that have been very controversial. It would also include some of the income verification requirements that the Senate plan would address as well. So they are getting closer to each other, definitely more than this time a couple of days ago. But but the comments from Reid and Pelosi and Boehner have indicated they're definitely still far apart.
And the deadline is looming. Let me just share with our audience a portion of this White House statement from a spokesperson for the president who said, quote, unfortunately, the latest proposal from House Republicans does just that, a reference to the ransom, in a partisan attempt to appease a small group of Tea Party Republicans who forced the government shutdown in the first place. So as we speak to you on this Tuesday afternoon, who makes the next move and what can we expect?
Well, if I had a crystal ball, I would say exactly what to expect. The next move, now that the House Republicans have come out with their plan, Democratic leaders have criticized it. It will be interesting to see what President Obama says this afternoon. We've heard what the White House has said, but there's going to continue to be talks between Reid and McConnell. It's possible they will unveil a deal, or they will, come back with a proposal of their own that responds to some of the concerns that Speaker Boehner has. But we're at the point where these things will change every couple of hours in basically ping-ponging proposals back and forth. The question is, how long does this go on? And then the question is, does either of these plans pass the House or Senate? Ted Cruz has indicated that he would try and delay any Senate deal. You have the question of, will John Boehner bring up any Senate deal for a vote? Obviously, if he needed to rely on all of the Democrats and maybe a small minority of Republicans to pass it, that would put him in a precarious position. It would violate the Hastert rule. It would be doing something that the majority of his caucus don't like. So today and into tonight and tomorrow, expect a lot of ping-ponging kind of offers back and forth, kind of these dramatic statements back and forth. But they do seem, at the end, to be getting closer inch by inch.
And finally, Dan Berman, as you talk to your sources both at the White House and on Capitol Hill, where is the frustration level for elected officials and staffers who have to deal with all of this?
I mean, I think they're at a DEFCON 1 by now. I mean, this has been going on, obviously, in the shutdown for 15 days, and the negotiations, started well before that in September. They are looking at the reaction of the markets, the reaction of the public. The polls have shown that more people blame Republicans than Democrats for what's going on. The markets are definitely trying to send the message that they don't want America to go over the fiscal cliff. They don't want us to be in a position where we're not able to pay our bills or having to prioritize what bills we pay. It's been pretty exhausting. Senate and House have been here on weekends. They haven't gone home. For all the complaints about Washington not getting anything done, these guys are working hard to try and do something, but they're still going to take movement at the top in order to finish this off.
And one other bit of breaking news, we heard from Senator Reid, according to your own news organization, Politico.com, that the Senate will reject the current House plan.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds about right. I mean, they're going to keep going.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, it's now been 2 weeks since the launch of the insurance exchanges that were created by President Obama's health care law. After 2 weeks of delays, error messages, things that the President calls glitches, the American people are united in saying that this is what a train wreck looks like. A recent poll by the Associated Press found that only 7% of Americans say that this rollout has gone either very well or extremely well. And the Obama administration continues to say that the problems were just because of too many people trying to check out the website the first day. So I bring to the floor, Mr. President, the front page of Sunday's New York Times, Sunday, October 13th, now 13 days into the exchange, with the headline above the fold, front page Sunday, "From the start, signs of trouble at health portal. Many deadlines missed. Website problems may imperil finances of insurance market." This goes on. This is a front page story, continues on inside the paper, and it talks about how in March, Henry Chow, the chief digital architect of the Obama administration's new online insurance marketplace, told industry executives that he was deeply worried about the website's debut. And he was quoted at the time as saying, "Let's just make sure it's not a third world experience." That's what he told them. And as I read from the paper, 2 weeks after the rollout, few would say his hopes were realized. They say for the past 12 days, a system costing, and it cost the taxpayers, more than $400 million, and billed by the President and by this administration, billed as a one-stop click-and-go hub for citizens seeking health insurance, has thwarted the efforts of millions to simply log on. Simply log on. The growing national outcry has deeply embarrassed the White House, which has refused to say how many people have enrolled through the Federal Exchange. They're refusing to answer the questions. Even some supporters of the so-called Affordable Care Act worry that the flaws in the system, they say, if not quickly fixed, could threaten the fiscal health of the insurance initiative, which depends on throngs of customers to spread the risk and keep prices low. And even though the President has called it glitches, the quote here is, "These are not glitches," said an insurance executive who has participated in many conference calls on the Federal Exchange. Like many people interviewed for this article, this executive spoke on the condition of anonymity, saying he did not wish to alienate the federal officials with whom he works, but he said the extent of the problems is pretty enormous. At the end of our calls, people just say, "It's awful, just awful." So to the President of the United States, and he and I talked about this directly face-to-face on Friday at the White House, he said, well, we just have a problem with the cash register. I would say that this is a website with major flaws. It goes way beyond the cash register. One online database programmer told CBS News that he said, quote, "It wasn't designed well, it wasn't implemented well, and it looks like nobody tested it." That's from a computer expert who says he supports the law, but that the website, he said, needs a complete overhaul. He told the network, "I'd be ashamed and embarrassed if my organization delivered something like that." And remember, Mr. President, they spent $400 million of hard-earned taxpayer dollars. This guy says he'd be ashamed and embarrassed to deliver something as bad as the Obama health care exchange. Well, I think the Obama administration should be embarrassed about the whole law. This health care law wasn't designed well, hasn't been implemented well, and it looks like nobody tested it. The problems that we've seen are not just first-day glitches. The problems have continued. People still can't sign up easily. It's still not easy to use as Amazon. Remember, the President of the United States promised it would be as easy to use as Amazon.com. And why are there still problems 2 weeks later? The CEO of that insurance company said yesterday, this is now almost 2 weeks into it, he said there's so much wrong, he said you just don't know what's broken until you get a lot more of it fixed. So we still have no idea how many people have been able to enroll successfully. So what is the Obama administration continuing to hide? Wolf Blitzer came out last week on CNN and said if they weren't fully ready, they should accept the advice of Republicans at giving them delay it a year. Get it ready. Make sure it works. Even Jon Stewart was asking why the Obama administration gave a one-year delay to big business, but not to the American people. I would tell you, Mr. President, if you're the Obama White House, when you've lost Jon Stewart, you know things are not going well. The problems don't end with the media or professional comedians. A Democrat member of the House who actually voted for this health care law called the launch of the exchanges excruciatingly frustrating. Robert Gibbs, who, remember, the President's former press secretary, he said yesterday, quote, "I hope they fire some people that were in charge of making sure that this thing was supposed to work." So the biggest cheerleaders for the President's health care law are now turning against it. The American people do not like it. People are not buying the administration's excuses for why it's failed. Well, this is, of course, bad for the President, but the American people have even bigger problems, and that's what we should really be focused on. The White House is worried about how this looks from a PR standpoint, but we should also be talking about the real harm that this health care law is doing for hardworking Americans and their families and their jobs and their paychecks. Many of them are going to lose their doctors who aren't included in the insurance plans sold in the exchanges. Many are already seeing that their premiums are going up because of all the Washington mandates. Remember the President and the promises in passing this health care law? That's not what the people are seeing today. One mother told a TV station in Allentown, Pennsylvania, that when she went to sign up on the website, she was told her premium would be almost $950 for her family. She said that's $765 more than she pays now. She told the station it would take food out of our mouths to be able to afford this coverage. This is what the President of the United States and Democrats in this body have foisted on the American people. People are finding that not just the premiums are going up, many of their other health care costs are also higher. The Chicago Tribune had this headline on Sunday. They said Obamacare deductibles may cause sticker shock. Insurance companies are requiring higher out-of-pocket expenses to pay for complying with the new rules. Expenses of complying with rules. Not expenses to give you health care, not expenses to keep you healthy, not expenses to prevent injury or illness. Expenses to pay for complying with new rules. That's the Chicago Tribune, the President's hometown newspaper. As if all that weren't bad enough, the administration is still insisting it's going to fine people who don't have insurance, even though people can't even sign up in the Obamacare website successfully. The administration was saying that this is a long process and the people have until the end of March of next year to enroll in the exchanges, but then even that changed last week. Now it turns out people will actually have to sign up 6 weeks earlier than that, by Valentine's Day, or pay the tax penalty. So what we're looking at is a tax penalty, 1% of income or $95, whichever is greater that first year. So that could be a sizable amount of money for some families who thought they were going to get affordable insurance under the President's health care law because that's what the President promised them. He stood in Congress. He told the American people that. He stood in front of groups all around the country, and the American people feel misled and deceived. All of this frustration and expense and stress and pain, it was all avoidable. Democrats in Congress and President Obama need to swallow their pride. They need to admit that the problems with the health care law are not limited to a bad website. The problems with the health care law run much deeper, and they're only going to get worse. We must do something to stop this terrible law from doing more damage to people's jobs, their care, and our country. The President will be held to the promises he's made as recently as 2.5 weeks ago. People will be able, if they like their doctor, they can keep their doctor. The cost would be less than a cell phone bill. And what we're seeing as well is, he said, that it will be easier to use than Amazon.com. This health care law has failed miserably. We needed health care reform so people could get the care that they need from a doctor they choose at lower cost. They have not gotten it, and it is time to repeal and replace this terrible health care law. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from New Hampshire.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would ask that myself and the senior senator from South Carolina and the senator from Georgia, if he comes in as well, that we be permitted to enter into a colloquy.
Without objection.
Thank you. I believe up to 20 minutes.
Without objection.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, I come to the floor today to talk about something that is fundamental to all of us, and that is the safety and security of our country. On October 5th, our special forces did an excellent job in conjunction with our intelligence community, and I commend the administration for ordering the raid that captured a key al-Qaeda terrorist whose name is Abu Anas al-Libi. What they did when they captured him is they put him on a ship. And about a week ago, my colleague from South Carolina and my colleague from Georgia, who is the ranking member of the Intelligence Committee, we stood up and we said, why, when we gather and we capture successfully, which is as a result of the great work done by our special forces and our intelligence agents, one of the most important al-Qaeda captures that we have made in our country in years, why are we putting him on a ship for purposes of interrogation instead of bringing him to the Guantanamo Bay detention facility, which is a top-rate detention facility where we can do a lengthy interrogation of someone who has been associated with Osama bin Laden, who has been associated with the current head of al-Qaeda, Anwar al-Awlaki, someone who is charged with participating and being involved in the 1998 Kenya and Tanzania bombings at the embassies that killed 224 people, including 12 Americans. Someone who's been described as a potential treasure trove of information about the activities of al-Qaeda, their plans, and the information we have that's been released publicly is he's someone that Anwar al-Awlaki actually may have sent to Libya to try to make sure that they could have the al-Qaeda network in Libya. Let's not forget what happened on September 11th a year ago in Libya, where our ambassador and 3 brave Americans were murdered. Does Mr. al-Libi know anything about that? We will never know fully what Mr. al-Libi knows, because after a week on the ship, where our intelligence officials were given an opportunity to speak to him, he was transferred to federal district court, and today in federal district court he pled not guilty to the bombings, the 1998 bombings at the embassy. He was given a lawyer, and we know when these terrorists are given a lawyer, it gives them an opportunity to say, I won't talk to anyone anymore because I have a lawyer. They're told they have the right to remain silent. It's irresponsible for our nation to capture a top al-Qaeda terrorist and tell him, here's your lawyer a week later, here's your right to remain silent, because the most important piece that we have to protect our country is information to prevent future attacks, information that our intelligence officials can use about the al-Qaeda network to protect Americans, to protect our allies. And that information was given up because this administration is so worried and so concerned about political points, about closing Guantanamo Bay, that they would rather transfer someone after a week who is a key al-Qaeda operative to federal district court in New York, give him a lawyer, instead of a lengthy interrogation designed to find out everything that he knows. It took years to get the information that led to the bin Laden raid that captured and killed Osama bin Laden. And yet a key al-Qaeda operative, only a week of interrogation because they're so worried about we don't want to add any more people to those that are present at Guantanamo Bay, that they would rather put that political goal above gathering information to make sure that America is protected. It's wrong, and we will never know what we lost for information that could have protected Americans by only allowing this interrogation to go a week in military custody instead of a lengthy interrogation in a top-rate detention facility. Now, one of the reasons that the administration has given is that he had medical issues. And if he did have medical issues, guess what? Guantanamo Bay actually has top-rate medical facilities. And had we captured him and brought him right there, in fact, these are the same types of medical services that our own men and women in uniform are able to receive. He could have been treated there, and we also could have kept him there and made sure that we prioritized getting information about al-Qaeda from him to prevent future attacks against America and to stop the terrorists with this information. Because the more information we have, the better we can protect our country. You know, since I got in the Senate on the Armed Services Committee, I've been repeatedly asking the administration, what is your detention and interrogation policy? What if you capture the head of al-Qaeda tomorrow? And you know what I get from the top military leaders? I've gotten answers like, I would need lawyerly help on that one. We're still working on our detention and interrogation policy. Well, while they have had years to work on this, we are left where we are. That a top al-Qaeda terrorist, after only a week of interrogation, would be given a lawyer so that they can accomplish their political goals instead of prioritizing gathering information from someone who has known Osama bin Laden, been involved with him, knows the current head of al-Qaeda, and was captured in Libya, and finding out what that individual knows to keep America safe. I hope that the administration will stop doing this. We can't put politics above intelligence gathering to protect our country. And I would ask the senator from South Carolina, do you believe we're still at war with al-Qaeda? And how important is it that we gather information from terrorists that are captured and that those interrogations are done in a lengthy basis instead of just a short period like a week?
Well, I want to thank my colleague from New Hampshire about being one of the strongest voices from the day you've gotten here in the Senate to talk about the difference between fighting a war and fighting a crime. You've been the Attorney General of New Hampshire. I've been a military lawyer for over 30 years. The legal systems to fight a war are different than the legal systems to solve a domestic crime. Here's the problem. Do I believe that al-Qaeda is at war with the United States and our values and our friends? Would they kill us all if they could? Yes. Why did 3,000 Americans die on 9/11/2001? They couldn't kill 3 million of us. If they could, they would have. If you believe that, then the goal of our generation is to marginalize this movement, and when we capture one of them, to find out what they're up to. Dying in their cause is not a deterrent. It's like first prize. So when you tell somebody who's joined up al-Qaeda, you may die in the course of this attack, and they say, good. The goal is to prevent them from hitting us. And the best way to do that is through intelligence gathering. So when you capture someone who is determined by our military and intelligence community to be a member of al-Qaeda, then under the law of war, the authorization to use military force passed by Congress over a decade ago, you can hold that person under the law of war to gather intelligence. Now, why is that the case? War is about winning the war. Enemy prisoners are valuable, captured alive, because they can provide you information about what the enemy's up to. When you charge someone with a crime, you cannot spend a long time with them without their lawyer trying to figure out if they committed the crime because of the right against self-incrimination in our criminal justice system. The military legal system and the law of war is completely different when it comes to asking questions of an enemy prisoner about future military activity or what they know about past operations. The most dangerous thing we could do as a nation is to treat a captured al-Qaeda terrorist as a common criminal, read them their Miranda rights, and put them in civilian court before we have a chance to gather intelligence. That's exactly what the Obama administration did here. To their credit, they captured al-Libi. And here's what breaks my heart the most. The Special Forces units who go into Libya and Somalia and go into Pakistan risk their lives to capture these people alive, if possible, so that we can gather intelligence. It really does bother me that this operation, which was very successful, that we only had control of this enemy prisoner for about 10 or 11 days. You'll never convince me that in that short period of time we were able to gather the intelligence he possessed, because for 20 years he's been associated with al-Qaeda at the highest levels. He was a treasure trove of information. So this was a political decision by the Obama administration, not a legal decision based on the law of war. This is not what our military advises, our intelligence community advise. This is what the President has chosen to do because he doesn't want to use Guantanamo Bay. Why was he placed on a ship? Because there is no prison available to the United States other than a naval vessel to hold someone as a enemy combatant under the law of war. Why? Because this President refuses to use Guantanamo Bay. If we can close Guantanamo Bay and create a new prison to allow people to be held as enemy combatants, sign me up. But the idea of not having a jail available to the United States on land at a time of great stress during a very pivotal moment in the war on terror is an ill-conceived and dangerous policy. So I want to applaud the senator from New Hampshire for bringing this issue up. And here's what we need to understand as members of Congress. This policy cannot be sustained. When we capture high-value targets, a 20-year veteran of al-Qaeda, we are crazy as a nation not to use the law of war to gather intelligence. I'm not for torturing anyone. I've been a military lawyer for 31 years. I believe in the Geneva Convention. I believe that my country is special. I believe in the international regimes about how you interrogate prisoners who you hold. I know what al-Qaeda does to their prisoners. I do not want to be like them. I want to be the United States. But the United States has a right under the law of war to gather intelligence. The last thing a member of al-Qaeda should hear when they're captured is you have a right to remain silent, here's your lawyer. I don't want them to remain silent. I want them over time to provide us with whatever intelligence is available. Why was he moved off the ship? Apparently he had a medical condition that could not be treated on the naval vessel. I believe in providing quality health care to prisoners of war simply because I want that standard to be available to our soldiers in future wars. The standard we set today could follow us into the next war, and unfortunately there will be. But having to take him off the ship because he was sick is no excuse to stop the interrogation to gather intelligence. Putting him on the ship because you don't want to use Guantanamo Bay is a ill-conceived and designed strategy that it's not changed or replaced is going to come back to haunt this country. This man possesses an enormous amount of intelligence potential. He is now in federal court. He will be given a lawyer, and once he's charged with a crime, he should be given a lawyer. But before that, we have the right under the law of war to hold him, to gather intelligence, treat him humanely, but question him about what he knows about Al-Qaeda, because they're still out there lurking. So I would end with this. I would like to work with the senator from New Hampshire and anybody on the other side who would like to try to find a detention and interrogation policy that is more rationally based. Guantanamo Bay, in its early years, did hurt the image of this country. Some of our interrogation techniques right after 9/11 hurt us as a nation. Guantanamo Bay has been reformed. It's Geneva Convention compliant. The Detainee Treatment Act that I helped author with Senator Levin and McCain is the gold standard of how you treat somebody under the law of war. I am proud of the system we have created over the last several years in a bipartisan manner, and I would urge this administration to create a vehicle to interrogate under the law of war people like al-Libi so that we can be prepared for the next attack. And the policy they have in place today is going to deny this country the ability to gather valuable intelligence. And when it comes to defeating al-Qaeda, the more you know about how they behave and what they're up to, the safer we will be, because they will not be deterred by the threat of death. You cannot deter them. You have to stop them. You have to hit them before they hit you. And the best way to do that is to gather intelligence when you find someone like al-Libi. And I am very disappointed that we have blown it when it comes to intelligence gathering with this high-value target. And I'm very sad to report to the military members and their families that the bravery you have demonstrated and shown just a few weeks ago has been undermined, in my view, by an irrational political decision that denies our country the ability to learn from a high-value target that you risk your life to capture. So I don't know how to fix this in the current political environment, but I know as a military lawyer it needs to be fixed, and I know that we're not elevating our country by diminishing our ability to use legal systems that have been around for hundreds of years at a time when we need them the most. So I look forward to working with the senator of New Hampshire, who's become one of the leading voices when it comes to detention and interrogation under the law of war.
I thank the senator from South Carolina, and let me just make a correction for the record. I used the name al-Awlaki. It's Ayman al-Zawahiri, who is the current head of al-Qaeda, and what I meant to say for the name. And the point is this: if we capture Zawahiri tomorrow, are we going to put him on a ship? And is he only going to be on the ship for a week? When we gather information from him to ask him what future attacks are you planning against America and our allies? Does that make any sense? And then we're going to give him a lawyer and tell him you have a right to remain silent? No, what makes most sense is that we have a detention and interrogation policy that, with people like al-Libi, that we take as much time as we need to make sure that we find out everything they know about al-Qaeda, protect America. And if we capture Zawahiri tomorrow, that we make sure that we protect America and find out everything that he knows. That's what we're worried about, and that's what we need to do for our country.
Would you yield for a question?
Yes, I would.
We're throwing around names. I think Zawahiri is the person who took bin Laden's place. You know, if we captured him tomorrow, that would be the ultimate treasure trove.
Right.
Can you tell us a little bit about this individual called al-Libi? Is he just, you know, why do we believe he would be such a treasure trove? What is his background? How long has he been involved in al-Qaeda? And what have we missed here? What opportunities have we lost by only holding him as an enemy combatant for less than 2 weeks?
So Mr. al-Libi is someone who has been alleged to have been involved in al-Qaeda for decades. He is someone who is, as early as the 1990s, was working with Osama bin Laden. He is alleged to have been involved, and that's what he's charged with in federal court, as I mentioned, the 1998 bombings of the Kenya and Tanzania's embassies, and that killed 224 people, including 12 Americans. He reportedly played a critical role as the intermediary between Zawahiri, who we just discussed, who took over for Osama bin Laden as the head of al-Qaeda, in an effort to establish an al-Qaeda-affiliated operation network in Libya, where our ambassador, of course, was murdered along with 3 brave Americans last September 11th. He has been reported to be an al-Qaeda computer intelligence and operations security expert, and he is alleged to have been involved in al-Qaeda strategic planning. This is one of the most important captures we've had in years.
Would you yield for one more inquiry? He was captured in Tripoli, Libya. That's right. Isn't that right?
Yes.
We believe he was in Libya before the attack on our consulate in Benghazi.
We do.
Right? We also know him to be one of the higher-level al-Qaeda operatives roaming the planet. He was involved in bombing our embassies in 1998 in Kenya and Tanzania. Is that correct?
That's right.
What are the odds that he was in Tripoli before the Benghazi attack, had a record of bombing embassies in the 90s, and had nothing to do with the consulate attack in Benghazi? You know, you're a prosecutor. What do you think the odds of this guy not having any knowledge or involvement in killing our ambassador in Benghazi and being involved in the attack on our consulate that was organized by al-Qaeda affiliates? And what have we learned, if anything, about his potential involvement in Benghazi? How can you learn everything this man has done in 11 or 12 days before you give him a lawyer? I would argue you can't.
Senator, your time has expired, sir.
Could I, 1 minute? Evenly. I would argue...
Without objection.
Thank you.
I would argue you can't possibly understand all he knows about Benghazi and the last 20 years of terrorism by holding him on a ship for less than 2 weeks. He should be held at Gitmo as long as it takes to find out what he knows. Then he should be tried. Do you agree with that?
I agree with the senator from South Carolina. We need to protect our country. That means a lot longer than a week-long interrogation. Thank you, Mr. President.
President?
Senator.
Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. President,
Senator from Vermont.
I might for a moment. We've had dozens and dozens of these people that have been arrested. We had the so-called underwear bomber. We had a recent one, a member of Osama bin Laden's family, and others. They're given their Miranda warning. They won't shut up. They just keep talking on day after day after day. It's my experience, if you're going to talk, you're going to talk. We have a Miranda warning or not. And wouldn't it be nice if we demonstrate to the rest of the world that we're not afraid of these people, that we have the best court systems in the world and we're going to use them? We have had 3 or 4 convictions in military commissions on terrorism cases. We've had several hundred in courts. And senators, it's really not responsible to talk about, oh my gosh, we just took them straight to Gitmo. Gitmo by itself is damaging the interests of the United States and the image of the United States. But the fact of the matter is these people we've arrested and run through our court system, they usually will talk ad nauseum, whether they've had the Miranda warning or not. So let's be realistic. It might be a nice talking point to scare people, but the people who are actually involved in prosecution know it works.
Mr. President.
Senator from Rhode Island.
Mr. President, we yesterday heard very optimistic news about steering away from the brink of American default before it became too late. Majority Leader Harry Reid came to the floor, gave very optimistic reports. Minority Leader Mitch McConnell came to the floor, gave very optimistic reports. They hinted very strongly that the deal was close. Time was scheduled with the caucuses, presumably to make a presentation of the deal. And then what? And then what? We have had some very interesting speeches and colloquies from our Republican colleagues on the floor. I found the debate as to whether our defense and law enforcement experts had kept an al-Qaeda captive in the right location to be interesting. I found the earlier discussion about the insurance exchange websites to be a very interesting discussion. I found the discussion earlier this morning about Iran. Very interesting discussion. But what's even more interesting is what they're not talking about. What they're not talking about is that today the Republican leader pulled out of those very productive negotiations, of those very optimistic negotiations, of those negotiations that promised an end to this crisis. I find that absolutely stunning. I'm amazed that we are in a situation where that close to resolving this crisis and avoiding the catastrophes that have been predicted, one side would simply walk away. And I don't blame the minority leader. The information that I have is that he was asked to do so, that the message came from the other side, from the Speaker, that Speaker Boehner torpedoed the productive, bipartisan Senate negotiations that were at the brink of resolving this crisis. Instead of the bipartisan successful process, Speaker Boehner has wanted to interrupt and bring in the same partisan House process that has been a disaster for us over and over again. 100% partisan, 100% politics. We have sent bills over to the House. Those bills have never been brought up for a vote. They've been monkeyed with before they've been brought up, but House members have never had the chance to vote on a Senate-approved measure, which would have ended it. That's the Speaker's choice. It's the so-called Hastert rule. Unless a strong majority of the Republicans is for something, he won't give Democrats a chance even to vote, let alone to be a part of the negotiations. So here in the Senate, you have bipartisan negotiations with the leaders from both sides filled with optimism and hope. On the other side, you have a leadership that won't talk to the Democrats, has purely partisan decisions about whether something shall come to the floor, and has not yet brought a Senate bill to the floor for a clean vote. It is a nightmare over there. And the strategy hasn't worked. In case they didn't get the memo, holding the economy hostage was a terrible choice for the Speaker. Causing the shutdown was a terrible choice. Holding the credit of the United States government hostage has been a terrible choice. To use a word that was used on the floor this morning by one of our Republican friends, it was a fool's errand. It was a fool's errand that put the party in a ditch. In a ditch was the quote. Well, unfortunately, because he's the Speaker, it's not just the Republican Party that's in the ditch. The whole country is in the ditch as this default looms. Some of them are trying to get out of the difficulty that they find themselves in by pretending that the default isn't real. We have default deniers now, side by side, I guess, with the climate deniers and the other deniers. They deny that October 17th is the real date when anything might go wrong. They deny that anything bad will actually really happen if the United States government defaults. They deny that if we just pay the Treasury bills and leave other things unpaid, anything really bad will happen. Treasury bills get sold in an auction, in a market. If you're going to that auction to buy Treasury bills and you see a government that isn't paying Social Security recipients on time, that has massive liquidity and cash flow problems as a result of the debt limit failure? We may say, yeah, we'll pay you first, but are you really going to pay the same rate for that security of that country while that country is facing all of these other problems? It is a preposterous notion. It is the type of notion that you can only believe when you absolutely need to believe it for your ideological purposes. Reality simply does not support a notion like that. If you are living in a cocoon world of extremist ideology, you can come up with thoughts like that. And if you're only talking to other people who think the same way, you can kind of agree that that thought makes sense. But there's a little problem. Reality wins. Reality always wins. They're playing with dynamite over there, and they're pretending that it's not even dangerous. It would be one thing if we understood that they respected how very dangerous the stunts are that they are pulling in the House Republican leadership. It's even more dangerous when they don't appear to know the danger that they are causing for our economy. I hope that we will get back to work here in the Senate right away with a bipartisan solution to this, rather than allowing the House and the Speaker to wreck the opportunity that we had just as late as yesterday in order to play dangerous partisan games. We don't have the time for that, and it's the wrong thing. It's the wrong thing in a very immediate way in terms of the damage that it will do to our economy, to the world economy, to people across this country whose interest rates are pegged to Treasury bills, to anybody who depends on economy where people have confidence that the United States is a solid investment and have confidence that our economy is going to grow. The default puts all that at risk. It creates real economic hazards for our country. But the method of getting us here has additional hazards, and I'd like to close by talking about them. From the very founding of this republic, we have prided ourselves on our distinct American system of government. We have fought for it. We have protected it. It has seen us through world wars, civil wars, Great Depressions, Great Recessions, all types of calamity. And what it fundamentally is, the phrase we use probably as much as any other about our country, is that it is a government of laws. It is a government of laws. And it risks being turned in by a very small faction in one party, in one house, in one branch of government, into being turned into a government not of laws, but of threats. A government where the person who can make the scariest threat wins. It doesn't matter that what you're objecting to was passed in the regular order, passed by both houses of Congress, signed into law by the President, approved by the Supreme Court. It doesn't matter that it was the center of the last presidential election and that their point of view lost convincingly. What matters to them is that if they can make dangerous enough threats, they may be able to try to get their way anyway. Anyway. That is not the way a government of laws behaves. That is the way a government of threats behaves. And if we go down the road of a government of threats, we are taking a very big step away from our American heritage, away from the procedures of our American Constitution, and away from the values that have seen us through hundreds of years of growth and of pride. It is a dangerous point. And the fact that they're willing to do that, the fact that they're willing not only to wreck the economy, but to wreck the status of this country as one that is run by a government of laws and turn it instead to a government of threats, shows how shallowly they wear their patriotism on their sleeves. It is bunkum patriotism to put the real values of this country into the hopper and turn us into a government of threats instead of government of laws. A great judge, Supreme Court justice, once said that procedure is the bone structure of a democratic society. Breaking those bones to make your point is no way to enhance our democratic society. So I hope that the Majority Leader and the Minority Leader will resume their negotiations right away. I hope, frankly, it's begun already, and I just don't know about it yet. But we have got to get going. And if the Minority Leader is unwilling to tell Speaker Boehner, no, knock it off, you've done enough damage already, we're going to solve this in the Senate, and we're going to sit down and have a bipartisan compromise. If he's unwilling to say that, then we need to come back to the floor, and we need to bring up the bill that the Republicans filibustered on Saturday that would have gotten us out of this pickle. Time is short. We got to get moving. And if our colleagues on the other side then want to filibuster the solution to this debt limit crisis, they will have shown their hand in a very dangerous way. I yield the floor, and I note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander. A little bit more about what Senator Whitehouse was talking about. The headline of a story on the Hill on the negotiations to raise the debt limit and end the government shutdown, the Senate talks sidelined as House GOP scrambles for votes. The story says that Senate Leader Reid and Minority Leader McConnell suspended their recent talks as the Senate leader sought to give House Speaker Boehner more maneuvering room. Senator Lindsey Graham, who we saw on the Senate floor earlier this afternoon, was quoted in the story saying, "I don't know if anything in politics are completely dead, but they seem to be mortally wounded," referring to the talks in the Senate. And we're hearing reports that the House Rules Committee is expected to announce a new debt deal proposal shortly, and that it's expected to come up for a vote in the House tonight. The Rules Committee meeting could happen in the range of 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock Eastern Time. A couple of tweets with reporters with some details. Chad Pergram of Fox News tweets, House R's offering new plan. A CR to December 15th, debt limit to February 7th, no extraordinary measures, no Obamacare dollars for congressional staff, and administrative medical device out. That, I think, is referring to the medical device tax. And another tweet from Ryan Grimm of the Huffington Post. New House R plan would do CR till 12:15, debt ceiling till Feb 7th, and include Vitter Amendment, barring staff from health care. Then they'd leave town. And the last tweet we're going to read here is from David Drucker of the Washington Examiner, saying that Representative Nunes says bill posted at Rules any minute for vote at 8 or 9 p.m. Eastern Time. We're going to go now to Senate Leader Harry Reid talking about the negotiations with Republicans.
Mr. President, the House Republican leadership's plan that is now out and people have taken a look at it, it's a plan to advance an extreme piece of legislation, and it's nothing more than a blatant attack on bipartisanship. In the past several days, we've been engaged in productive bipartisan negotiations in the Senate. Everyone knows that. We've been working across party lines and making steady progress to achieve an agreement that reopens the government, protects the full faith and credit of our great country, and opens talks to put this country on a firm fiscal footing. Everyone needs to know that the measure under discussion in the House is no part of what we've negotiated here in the Senate. Mr. President, the debt is here. The deadline is looming. Rating agencies are talking about downgrading us as early as tonight. Again. I know I speak for many of us who've been working in good faith when I say that we felt blindsided by the news from the House. But this isn't the first time. Extremist Republicans in the House of Representatives are attempting to torpedo the Senate's bipartisan progress with a bill that can't pass the Senate, can't pass the Senate, and won't pass the Senate. The House measure would take away the President's fundamental authority. It's been in existence for as long as political science can remember. It's been in place for decade after decade after decade to prevent a catastrophic default on the nation's bills. Out of spite, Tea Party Republicans are trying to take authority away from President Obama. They would never, ever consider doing this if it were President Romney, President Bush, or President Bush, or President Reagan. Never. But as they've said, and they've cheered over there, the government's closed. We don't mind defaulting on the debt. It's good for the country. That's what they've said. Their legislation would also make unacceptable major changes to Obamacare. House legislation doesn't even include a process for bipartisan negotiations on a sensible long-term budget. They just throw out these numbers and think magic's going to happen, and somehow, comes January 15th, everything will be hunky-dory. There are still processes we have to follow. They set no pattern, no schedule, no routine to do that. For weeks, Republicans have claimed they want to negotiate, but their legislation completely ignores the need to work together to craft a budget and put our country on a fiscally sustainable path. For years, Mr. President, they've complained about, why don't we have a regular order here? They complained about a lack of a budget. Now they don't want us even to negotiate a budget. Hard to comprehend this logically. But, Mr. President, the Tea Party-driven part of the Republican Party doesn't follow logic. Or why would they want to close the government for 15 days, have us default on our debt? Introduction of this measure by House Republican leadership is unproductive and a waste of time. Let's be clear. The House legislation will not pass the Senate. And here is what the White House said just a few minutes ago. Quote, The President has said repeatedly that members of Congress don't get to demand ransom for fulfilling their basic responsibilities to pass a budget and pay the nation's bills. Unfortunately, the latest proposal from the House Republicans does just that in a partisan attempt to appease a small group of Tea Party Republicans who forced the government to shut down in the first place. I'm very disappointed with John Boehner, who would once again try to preserve his role at the expense of the country. I've worked hard to rise above partisanship and find common ground in the Senate. And, Mr. President, we've done that together for the good of the nation. This is much bigger than the senator who's presiding from the state of Hawaii, or the assistant leader who's to my side. This is much bigger than that. It's much bigger than me. It's much bigger than two senators who are here from Connecticut. We have the senator who's chairman of the Budget Committee, Senator Murray. It's bigger than her. It's bigger than the senior senator from New York, Senator Schumer, who's on this floor. Mr. President, we have to start working together for our country. That's what we've been trying to do. This is so disappointing. On the eve of financial destruction for this great country, and that's what it is, to appease a small group of people over there. I'm so disappointed.
Senator Neal for a question.
I would be happy to.
I'd like to ask the Senator, Majority Leader, through the chair, one of the key elements in this new proposal from Speaker Boehner is to diminish this President's authority to deal with a default on our national debt. This authority, so-called extraordinary measures or emergency measures, gives to presidents, going back to President Kennedy, the wherewithal through the Treasury Department to try to